let's eat into our coffee a bit, and we can push back the next session. So we've got at least 10 minutes, quarter of an hour now, and I throw it open to our two remaining panelists, and the floor is really yours. There are several things that I wouldn't mind bringing up from what they said, but if there's anything that immediately occurs to anyone, then I'm looking out, and yeah, the guy in the back there, and that's we'll get a microphone to you so that we can make sure we've got the sound recorded as well. Yeah.
Thank you. A question. A few themes coming out. One about churn, and that's bad. One about need for flexible workforce and young people actually maybe not wanting the constraints of a normal job. And also just thinking about the industry and how a lot of income is going to project-based income rather than retainer-based. So with all that context, what's your view on freelance? Because I personally vacillate between it being a good thing in that you can be more flexible as a business, or a terrible thing because it costs more money, and at the end of the year you sit back and go, why did we spend all that money on freelance?
Max.
So I think that as an agency, you add value to your customers. In other words, you make money by having your brand associated with your product, with the offering that you're providing. Whether you own the employees or not is not the key. It's how well, in an agile sense, you manage the projects that you're doing. So the key is not so much about retention, but by creating a vehicle that allows you to flexibly and agilely manage groups of people, whether they are on your payroll directly or whether they are external. So it's all about exactly the point Sydney was making, is that it's all about creating flexible structures that allow you to deliver in variable ways to your clients to add value. So the answer is, it's not about is freelance better than ownership. It's about how do we face the reality that it is becoming easier to be a freelancer and a contractor, and maybe we want to transition. There are going to be advantages for you as well. I mean, in some of the figures that Sydney was showing for retention, there's no question that it's much cheaper working with contractors because you don't have that ramp-up time. You don't have the development time that has to go into it. You don't have to create the career path. So there are a lot of costs that you don't face. The flip side of those is that they're not necessarily inculcated in the culture of the organization, but you need to do the cost analysis, which Sydney was alluding to earlier. And I would say that the short answer is create structures for managing both employees and freelancers.
Sydney.
That was an excellent question, because it's an interesting dilemma that you see within different types of agencies. What you're talking about is more the project-driven environment. I believe that there should be more flexible staff because you have more of an ebb and flow. When you're having project business, you need a base of people that you always are the relationship people, that everyone who's running that client. But you need the flexibility of bringing in specific talent for that specific technical job that you need, that you don't need them on hand all the time. They're going to be doing this, and they could be very expensive talent, and they're going to get bored if they're not kept occupied. So I was a very strong believer, and still am, of having a considerable wiggle room to have freelancers, and in that context, freelancers are good. You have to be able to manage them well, and I agree with everything that Max said. It really is how you manage them. I've also seen on other side where the work is more steady, it is less expensive and better to have full-time staff and only fill in when you have to. But project-driven, I think, is a different model.
Yeah. And again, a pause, and the microphone will come, but not from where you're expecting it to come.
It took me by surprise.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much for terrific presentations this morning. And there were two things that really stood out for me, one from each presentation. One was this performance. You manage performance to drive engagement rather than focusing on engagement to drive performance. And I do think, actually, we often tend to do the latter. And I think that's a really big lesson that we would take forward. And the second one was that cost of turnover, which we all know it's high, but actually quantifying that I thought was terrific. And those are two big things I'd take away. And in a way, the question is interlinked, but I'd say, in your view, how good are we at that first thing, really focusing on performance to drive engagement as an industry? Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it's a buzzword. I think engagement has taken over from where EI, emotional intelligence, left off. We got sick of emotional intelligence, and so we've needed to find something to take the vacuum. Just to give a perspective on that, did some work at Friends Provident, for example, last year, some work at John Lewis, also last yearish. Both cases, absolutely no doubt that as engagement increases, performance rises. You keep increasing engagement, and for some reason, performance starts to fall. Why? Who knows? Could it be that over-engaged employees are exhausted and that they're just not they're just not achieving a work-life balance? At John Lewis, one of the catches is that team managers are their performance is based on the performance of their team and the engagement level of their team. Now, those two, as you will well know if you're a manager, are trade-offs against each other. Whip them hard, get a lot of performance in, down goes the engagement. Be lovely and have lots of team hugs, and down goes the performance. And so, how good are people at managing performance? I think that you need to be managing both performance and engagement, and it's a question of understanding that there is a sweet spot. So as soon as you acknowledge that taking engagement beyond a certain point has got negative consequences, that in itself is probably the insight that you need to more effectively manage the relationship between engagement and performance.
Can you give an example of over-engagement?
Over-engagement as well. Well, the only way that we as consultants, if you like, have of measuring engagement is what somebody tells you and reports on it on a survey. So who knows what they're saying? The first thing is that you probably want to be using 360s to measure engagement. Self-report, anything is nonsense. So you probably want to be starting to use 360 tools to do that. But a sign of an over-engaged employee is somebody who's probably working really late, who's so attached to the brand that they're losing focus of what's going on around them in the big picture. So when you're over-engaged, you're probably not a senior management. You're probably not a senior manager. You're probably operating at quite a focused, very, very specialized level. So there's a point where you want alignment with the brand, if that's what engagement means to you, but you don't want to get somebody that's so over-aligned with the brand that their whole life just becomes around that. I mean, the two big measures of engagement at the moment are amount of discretionary time put into the job over and above what is required, and alignment with organizational values. The big issue that we get with multinational corporates is that they often compare their engagement scores and they're measured in different ways. So the one is measuring on discretionary and the other one is measured on alignment, and they're adding the apples and oranges and giving average. That's meaningless. So the first thing you need to do is decide what do you mean by engagement, and then if people are putting in too much discretionary, you need to start cutting back, because work-life balance works for everybody, unless the person is, escaping something else in their life, which is, that then they can come to the therapy practice for something.
Sydney, anything to add?
No, I think
No.
Max is a better expert in that category than I am.
Anyone else? One thing, just finally, there is a cost, isn't there, to keeping people as well. Even good people, actually, run out of steam, run out of zest, run out of ideas. That's also difficult to measure. And it struck me, and everyone's accepted, basically, what you say, that this business of retention is hugely important. But actually, it struck me, and I'm not just talking about the Presenting Teams Today program, where of course we all go on and on and on, but there are costs involved which are also difficult to measure, aren't there, in having people who just actually need some kind of reinvigoration.
Cost of not doing it is higher.
I don't know how you measure that.
Cost of not doing it is easy. I mean, if you're not constantly reinventing yourself as a human being, as an organization, you're dying. You're not moving, because you're in a competitive world where resources are getting smaller. There are more and more competitors going for the same jobs, going for the same number of clients. So if you're not growing, but the number of agencies is growing, then you are getting smaller. And the only way that you're going to continue to grow is by doing something different and by innovating. So the cost of not doing it is your demise. So the answer is you have to keep innovating, and we're going to see that in a turbulent world. I mean, you know, we started seeing it in the 80s and 90s to some extent. By the time the noughties are here, survival means, you know, who knows what each of us in this room is going to be doing in 5 years' time. It probably is not going to be much related to what we're doing today. And I would expect organizations to recognize that and to start deliberately introducing what we call perturbations as new innovations.
Well, the problem is as we've seen, clients don't want to pay us anymore. We keep getting squeezed and squeezed every time there's a new negotiation, or we win a new client, we have to give up certain things, or to retain a business, we have to lower our fees. This is continuing to go and then get tighter and tighter in managing and still wanting to keep not the performance, but the hourly type involvement. Is that we as agencies then have to figure out, initial reaction of management is how are we going to cut costs? Cut costs instead of invest. And it's because that hidden cost that you can control, that you actually have to invest, and therefore you will reduce cost.
Final question, Ian.
It's actually more of a comment, because I'm conscious we
Yeah.
want coffee, but one thing that we looked at in our agency was actually turnover to a certain level is good.
Very.
Yeah? So the idea of actively managing turnover to actually get rid of who you don't want,
Yeah.
because that becomes a great motivator.
But even good people who have just...
Well, possibly, but,
Yeah.
but also, you know, less
Yeah.
good people. How do you actively manage it to ensure you're moving on and bringing in fresh, and that actually motivates people?
Yes, it does.
So turnover isn't always a complete negative. The level of turnover we are at as an industry is, but I'm supposing active turnover is something that needs to be addressed. So that was my only final comment for
Great thought with which to finish and have coffee, and we are, what are we? We're about 10 minutes behind schedule, so that's fine. We can start at, let's meet again 20 to 12 for the next session. Thank you again to our two
Thank
speakers.
you.